Welcome to You May Have Heard, where we take news stories and see if they're a load of old codswallop or not. In this second edition, has the Belgian government blocked the seizure of Russian assets locked in its banks that the Europeans want to use to fund the Ukrainian war effort? The vampiric enablers of authoritarian regimes are constantly afraid of two things. In the short term, that they will fall out of favour in the King's Court and end up, say, falling out of a window. The other long-term issue is if the local populace gets sufficiently tired of being ripped off and they end up strung up in the town centre along with their boss. This is one of the reasons China bans capital exchanges from its local currency. It doesn't want its elites to have too large a plan B if things go tits up in the Middle Kingdom. This is also why Hong Kong is one of the world's largest diamond markets, not because diamonds come from Hong Kong, but because the wealthy in China's ostensibly communist system use these small, extremely valuable lumps of carbon to smuggle money out of the country under Xi Jinping's nose. Not so with Russia's famous oligarchs. They've used nations that need capital influx more than they like to ask awkward financial questions for decades to hide ill-gotten gains. London was the cliched destination for this money covered in babushka blood, but it seems much of Europe was drinking from the same poisoned well. The bank in question, Euroclear, is in fact a securities clearing and settlement system, not a retail bank or vaulting service. Everything in question is digital and exists in the form of book entry securities and associated cash flows. Much of this is in the form of government bonds, but the cash generated from these bonds since the accounts were blocked has become significant. Apparently enough to keep the Kremlin's blood-soaked mitts off Kiev for the foreseeable future. A bit of a narrative has formed that this would all be so easy if it weren't for those cowardly Belgians, but spare a thought for these practical politics-played pragmatists. Their ultimate fear is that if the 140 billion euros is sent to Ukraine, a single pro-Russian EU country, such as Hungary or Slovakia, could veto the renewal of the EU sanctions against the regime. That would require Belgium to immediately return the missing funds to Russia. That would increase their national debt by a fifth, all going to the Kremlin. We Europeans are not like the Russians. We can't just wave a threat of unexpected defenestration in front of a judge's face and tell them what the law is. Considering Belgium has recently been struggling to find 9 billion down the back of the sofa for its current budget, being on the hook for 140 billion is understandably a bit perspiring for a nation of 11 million people. But time is of the essence. Ukraine's war budget is approaching shoestring proportions, and the coffers run dry altogether in April. European bureaucracy is not known for its speedy resolutions. Any system where most documents need to be translated into 24 languages isn't going to have a move fast and break things approach to anything.
With this motion of censure, we are wasting time. Putin will like it, what his friends are doing here. Let's be brief from a BBP point of view. We will unanimously vote against this motion of censure on Thursday.
Nonetheless, they have that slipperiest of creatures on the job. They've released the lawyers. A crack team of dealmakers and diplomats are currently trying to hammer out a fix to this predicament. The current exit to this problem lies in a clause in Article 122 of the EU Treaty, which allows governments to decide, in the spirit of solidarity between member states, upon the measure appropriate to the economic situation. The Commission wants to interpret this slightly garbled corpo speak to mean that in light of the enormous financial stakes in the case, the rest of the European nations can tell Viktor Orban to go stick his old chap in a plug socket if he thinks he can veto this one. The alternative is for EU taxpayers to shoulder the cost. Considering a fleet of EU nations are facing the highest tax burden ever at the moment, that will be as popular as swallowing a cup of cold sick. The key question is whether the Commission's latest legal gymnastics will be to the satisfaction of the Belgian Prime Minister.
I don't want to give a dime back to Mr. Putin, and I understand why everybody's looking at the huge amount of money. If you look at the sovereign assets, 170, in other countries it's also a lot. We are ready, willing and able to go forward. There's no problem, but I want answers on every question I asked. I want the maximum of legal certainty, I want solidarity, and I want transparency on the situation in the other countries. I don't think this is an unreasonable position.
Prompting him to allow the release of the Russian funds from the Euroclear banks in Brussels. The questions of how to overhaul the EU sanctions rules have been debated for years in Brussels' corridors of power. In October, the EU executive suggested using European Council conclusions from last year as a legal basis to keep the Russian assets frozen until it pays back post-war reparations. But several countries are opposed to this idea, fearing that using old political statements to dictate future policy would set a dangerous precedent. But don't abandon all hope, ye who entered just yet. It appears a deal of shared responsibility for the cash is approaching, with Prime Minister Keir Starmer of all people breaking the awkward silence and having his I am Spartacus moment, pledging 8 billion if things go south. Canada has also said they are exploring options. God, they want to be European so bad, don't they? Peace talks seem particularly intractable at the moment, considering either side still won't even share a negotiating table, so this issue isn't going anywhere.
But hey, what's 140 billion euro between friends?